I think it's fair to say this lockdown has been a sort of blessing in disguise for a lot of people, especially those who previously had to commute to and from work every day, and now a lot of them fortunately are able to work from home, which in some cases means a lot more time to spend on the things we want to be doing. So for many of us, our water railways finally get the attention they deserve. So BRM asked me to produce this farmyard diorama, and as you can see it's meant to be based on a corner filler, so we've got some third radius set track curves here which form the basis of the railway line behind. Now, the great thing about farmyards is that they're a hotbed for a plethora of scenic details, cameos and really interesting little scenes that are crying out to be modelled. And the best part about that is that farms are easily visible from public footpaths, bridleways and even main roads, so it's really easy to find your own inspiration. And of course you can always look online and there are plenty of resources available. One that I use for this project is actually a website called geograph.org.uk. Now the premise behind that website is for users to contribute photos of every grid square in the UK, so as you can imagine, loads of inspiration there. So now that we've got our inspiration, we can turn those into sketches. Now obviously the sketching stage can be somewhat optimistic compared to what you can actually get away with in the space available, so please do make sure to try out some mock-ups. It doesn't have to be anything complicated, just a bit of cardboard, just to check the heights and the line of sight and things like that. Make sure the scene is overly balanced. Now if you're computer literate, you might be able to get away with doing some 3D CAD work, and actually I made a really simple model on the free version of Google SketchUp, which enabled me to change embankment heights, move buildings around, and generally do everything that a mock-up can do, but far quicker. So now we can move on to the diorama itself, and what I thought I'd do is do a little tour of it and show you the different aspects and why I chose to model them and how they were made. So let's begin with the left hand side of the diorama and the straw field. Now I chose straw over corn or fields of wheat simply because I thought it would be a little bit easier, and I also had these really nice straw bales here. However, it wasn't actually plain sailing and the first attempt failed spectacularly. The second version you see here worked really well, although that doesn't mean I didn't run into some trouble. And unfortunately some of the glue decided to seep under the masking tape, and that meant that when I ripped off the masking tape it pulled with it not only some paintwork but some extra fibres which I actually didn't want it to pull off. However, areas where the masking tape was on for the least amount of time seemed to have worked really well, especially at the front of the diorama. And as you can see, the ridges and furrows are clearly demarked. And obviously the static fibres as they come are quite a garish colour, very yellow. So what I decided to actually do was to dry brush them with a mixture of light and dark browns respectively. And the overall result was a colour that better matched the straw bales. My only regret for this area was not adding a field margin. Now obviously farm machinery would not be able to do the edges of the field because there just isn't the room to manoeuvre. So next to watermeadow we have the silage clamp, and that's absolutely typical of many found across the country. And as you can see here, it's currently being temporarily used to store some hay bales. So not everything needs to be modelled as you'd expect to find it. And indeed, the silage clamp at my grandparents' farm was used for a whole manner of things, from storing farm machinery, to feeding cattle, to rearing young calves, and even for penning in cows ready to be weighed. Now, one thing I'd like you to take a closer look at is the weathering on the silage clamp. And as you can see, there's a lot of white marks, and especially as it curves down towards the front. Now, silage leaves a lot of residues that need to basically be removed. So that's why we've got the small drainage channel out front, which would actually be usually diverted away to an underground slurry tank. So next to the silage clamp we've got the footpath. Now that's absolutely typical of many found crisscrossing the UK. Now obviously with the proximity of the farm to the railway line, we're going to need something to stop the cows from escaping and getting in the way of trains. So we've got a little wooden stile here which has been scratch built by cutting down lollipop sticks, as you'll see in the video here. and that actually gives us room for a really nice little cameo. So we've got a cow here that seems to escape from its meadow somehow, and the farmer is behind the stile, clearly trying to coax it back to the field. And obviously we don't want the cow to be going back to the main road, so we've got the farmhand there at the bottom of the slope trying to direct the cow. Although if the cows are anything like my granddad's cows, they're going to be very stubborn, so that should be a very entertaining thing to watch in real life. So no farm would be complete without a barn, and here we've got a ready-made sample from Bachmann, and it's actually a really nice model. I don't tend to use these sort of pre-made buildings, preferring to build my own, but with a little bit of painting and weathering it really looks the part. And it also gives us a really quick way to start a build. Now the barn actually comes with red painted windows, doors and downpipes, and I'm not actually a fan of that. I thought it made it look a bit too posh and modern. So what I've done is I've actually painted over it with a more brown natural paint. From there I've added more weathering to make the paint look a little bit more dishevelled. So we've got a lot of whites down the bottom to suggest wood that started to rot. And it's a simple change like that, and the moss and lichen on the roof but make a huge difference. Now the best thing about moss and lichen is that it's really easy to make. All I did was simply roll some flock into some greeny yellow paint. I then applied it sparingly, using prototype photos where possible to guide the placement, and with a few more green streaks of dry brushed paint, it begins to really look a lot better. Now something I really want to talk about before we go any further is the tree at the front of the diorama. Now that started off life as, well, a really garish Hornby classic oak tree. And I found that not only was the foliage too bright, but it was also a little bit thin on the ground. So to fix the tree, what I decided to do was to wrap all the foliage in Woodland Scenics polyfibre. Onto that, basically hairspray was applied, and then their blended turf was added. I actually did a lot of dry brushing to the trunk as well, and if you look at any real tree, you'll see that the trunk tends to be a myriad of not only browns, but mostly greys. So together those two small changes, as you can see, made a huge difference. Now obviously the two bridges cross a stream, or in this case a brook, which is typical of many found in Dorset. This was actually remade not once but twice, and this third version was the last thing to go on the diorama. The first version was way too blue, whereas it should have been a green or a browny colour, and the second version suffered from two harsh transitions between the light and dark brown, which was supposed to represent the different depths of water. Now obviously by this point I'd already put down the static grass, so the problem came with the third version was how to blend in the new with the old. Now what I should have probably done is pluck away the static grass from the waterline before adding the water. However, what I ended up doing was using some World War Scenics dirt mix, which is from their hedgerow kit, and mixing that with some brown paint and applying it to the sides. Now there was still a gap between the mud that I just put down and the static fibres, so I decided to disguise that with the help of some miniature tufts. Now not only does that cover up the gap, it also adds a little bit more variation to the foliage, as would be found on the stream banks. So the last thing we're going to take a look at in this video is the dairy parlour. Now I've saved the best for last because this was based on a structure from my grandparents' farm, and as you originally saw in the 3D design, this was actually meant to be a curved Dutch barn. However, I really couldn't face doing all the complicated roof trusses, so I settled with something closer to home. However, there was one small snag. The original prototype had been modified substantially when my granddad stopped doing the dairy part of the farm. My solution was to turn to Google Street View, and amazingly, despite it being somewhat like looking for a needle in a haystack, I managed to find two examples, and as luck would have it, next to one of them was a cement block wall. So as I knew the size of one cement block, I could work out the rough dimensions, and as you can see it's a very small structure compared to the barn. So the silos help to offset the height, whilst also providing feed to the top of the dairy. And much like my grandparents' one, it's now modelled in a disused state, as there is no need for the dairy parlour now that there are only beef cattle here. So in summary, a lot of people make models to sort of immortalise childhood memories, and this diorama is no different. And in actual fact, the dairy parlour is the prime example of that. The curved roof here actually hid a loft on the inside, which was actually used to store all the cake for the cows. Now, cake is not something you particularly want to eat as a human, as I found out in my childhood, but it was actually used to feed the cattle for when they're being milked, so it gives them something to do while they're being milked, something to look forward to. It also helps to provide some much needed nutrients for them. And it's memories like that this sort of model helps to stir and relive. So it's a really great thing to build a model, especially when it has a close connection to you. So that's it for this video, and I really hope you enjoyed it, and I would absolutely love to see you immortalise something from your childhood, as I have done with the dairy parlour. It doesn't matter how small, what the theme is, it doesn't have to be a farmyard. Just tweet me at Studio Jamming with a picture of your model and a brief caption explaining the memory that it evokes. And of course, you can always ask me questions about this diorama over on RM Web.